Well, to some degree, it depends, I suppose, on the quality of the work, because one of those early pictures was called Scream and Scream Again, and it was from a kind of pulp novel written, it says on the cover, by Peter Saxon, who had written 25 or some other books, who I discovered was a brand name. There was nobody called Peter Saxon. Many people got the job to write a new Peter Saxon book, although there must have been a Peter Saxon once, I suppose. And the thing about that was, it was had a very fragmented sort of narrative, and I was brought in as a kind of surrogate writer for the writer-producer who'd written it. And the man I mentioned, Gordon Hester, didn't want to shoot the script because it was very tame. So that my kind of role there was to get back into the book, which had a kind of parallel narrative structure, rather disoriented. It was called The Disoriented Man in one version of one publication. And it was a fascinating thing because it just leaped from time frame to time frame, or from place to place. You didn't know where you were going. And it was radical in those days. So the thing about that was keeping very strongly attached to the structure of the book, but making it more realistic, if you can call it that, because it was a fantasy story. Because in the book, blobs land from some planet, glow, turn into human form, and start taking over the world. And I thought, well, we've seen that so many times before in much better versions. Supposing they weren't blobs, supposing they were the government, supposing people really were trying to create a race of super people by putting together different, it's a Frankenstein story, body snatching, bits of bodies, making a perfect body. But now we're in the then modern age, heart transplants, all these things had actually been happening. And it seemed much more interesting to make it real people, as it were, rather than blobs from Mars. And one of the reviews for it was saying how the last sort of reel of it is Vincent explaining what he's doing. And normally one wouldn't want to write a sort of 3 or 4 page dialogue scene of somebody explaining something. But it was a philosophical thing about what we can do now. And there is no God. We are God now, And people, this review said that the audience was absolutely silent listening to this. And I thought, well, this is nice, because it's a schlock movie. It went out with Hell's Angels on wheels or something, It's the sort of audience that should not be listening to 10 minutes of dialogue. So the thing there was keeping it as close to the book as possible, because it was a radical thing to do. Other adaptations, one tries to find the heart of the piece, I suppose, to make it as sort of cinematic as possible, to tell it from the point of view that an audience is going to follow in a very intriguing way, but keeping the essence of the piece as far as possible, and then figure out what is that essence. Sometimes, if the author's alive, you can say, what, for you. I did an adaptation of Hawksmoor of Peter Ackroyd's, and said to him, because it's such a complicated book, very hard to be faithful to that, what would he most miss in a movie? And he thought about that and said, the nursery rhymes. Because he had a thing where, both in the past and in the present, you'd hear nursery rhymes being sung. I thought, what a lovely thing that would be. So bridged my scenes from the past to the present with a nursery rhyme. You'd hear it being sung in a mean street in London in 1600, and you'd hear it now as a rap song on the radio as the modern character walks down the street, which I thought was a nice, neat thing to do. And the first thing the powers that be said, we hate those nursery rhymes, and poof, that was out. I think you said once that the first draft is the closest you'll ever get as a writer to your own intentions, and that was the case on that. So I think one would have to say, getting to the heart of the material and then trying to be faithful to it in a way that's also completely unique to the medium that one's dealing with, whether that's television or film.